On June 1st, Ukraine pulled off the impossible. With Operation Spiderweb, Ukraine decimated a huge chunk of Russia's bomber fleet using drones launched from inside Russia itself. The strike served as a wake-up call to President Vladimir Putin. No matter what he thought before, he now knew that Ukraine could hit him from inside Russia at any time. And now he's running scared. He's so scared that he's willing to minimize Russia's offensive capabilities to protect the few bombers he has left. So afraid of Ukraine is Putin that Russia has decided to hide its bombers deep in Siberia. That's according to The Telegraph, which on June 11 reported that Russia has scattered some of its most valuable warplanes to air bases that are located in some of the most remote parts of the country. The idea here is to create distance, which in itself seems to be an undesired confession that Putin has lost confidence in Russia's anti-air defenses. So, what is Putin moving? According to The Telegraph, he sent two of Russia's Tupolev T-160 bombers over 4,000 miles away from the front lines to the Anadyr airbase deep in Siberia. Also known as the Ugolny Airport, the base is a mixed-use military and civilian facility that's been around since the 1950s. Back then, it was a staging ground for other Russian bombers, including the Tu-95 and Tu-22M3. It's located around 410 miles away from Alaska, nestled deep within the remote Chukotka Peninsula. Now, it's a hiding place, one that's so far away from Ukraine that Putin will hope his bombers can never be hit while there. More details about what Russia is doing come from the Kyiv Independent and the Agents Devote Telegram channel. The Ukrainian outlet says that Putin has hurriedly rushed the Tu-160s from the Belaya airfield in the Irkutsk Oblast and the Olenya airfield in Murmansk, both of which were key targets of Ukraine's massive June 1st Operation Spiderweb. It also suggests that it's not just Siberia where Putin's Tu-160s are heading. Some of the bombers have also been sent to other remote airfields, including the Yelizovo base in Kamchatka and the Borysoglebskoye base that's deep within the Russian Republic of Tatarstan. More proof of Putin's big move comes from satellite imagery shared by the Agents Devote social media channel. In the picture, a highlighted Tu-160 can be seen, accompanied by even more details about just how drastic this move is. The Telegram channel says that Russia has moved 7 of its Tu-160s from the Belaya airfield as of June 5th, along with 3 Tu-160s it had stationed at the Olenya airbase. 2 of those bombers have arrived in the Siberian Anadyr base mentioned earlier, with another 3, which are apparently undergoing modernization, heading to the Borysoglebskoye. 3 more have ended up in Yelizovo, the channel says, with satellite imagery proving the move. And that's not all. Putin isn't just moving his Tu-160s. Any bomber that he thinks might become a target for Ukrainian drones is being moved as far away from the front lines as possible. The same Telegram channel reports that Putin's redeployment started the day after Operation Spiderweb. That's when 11 of his Tu-22M3 bombers were moved from the Olenya airbase targeted during the attack to the Ukrainka airfield, which is in the Amur region. 6 more Tu-22M3s ended up at the Engels 2 airbase, along with 4 Tu-95MS bombers. Another 4 Tu-22M3s have been shipped to the Mozdok airbase, which is located in North Ossetia and has been practically unused by Russia throughout the Ukraine war. This isn't a strategic deployment, it's an evacuation. Putin is running scared because he's worried that Operation Spiderweb could just be the start of a wave of Ukrainian attacks within his territory, and his fear may be destroying Russia's aerial offensives against Ukraine forever. That point will be revisited shortly. For now, the focus returns to the Tu-160 and why Russia is moving it as far as Siberia to keep it out of the range of Ukraine's drones. After all, everything Putin is doing right now is about protecting the Tu-160. According to The Telegraph, that aircraft is a strategic bomber capable of traveling at supersonic speeds and delivering nuclear warheads to a target. Putin hasn't used his nuclear option yet. Instead, he's been using his Tu-160s to launch conventional missiles at Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. Air Force Technology provides more details about the plane, noting that it stems from the Soviet era, having entered service in April 1987. Russia built 41 of them, with the Tu-160 being capable of hitting a top speed of 1,379 miles per hour, though it typically flies at a cruising speed of 570 miles per hour. The aircraft has a range of over 7,500 miles, and it's capable of staying in the skies for 15 hours before it needs to refuel. It can also be packed with a host of dangerous weapons. Leading the pack on the conventional side is the Tu-95MS, known to NATO as the AS-15 Kent. The Tu-160 can carry up to 12 of these strategic cruise missiles, divided between two internal missile bays. With a maximum range of 1,864 miles, the missile previously allowed Russia to launch strikes deep into Ukrainian territory from positions well behind enemy lines. It can't do that anymore. The base where it's sending its Tu-160s is over 4,000 miles away from Putin's target. The Tu-160 is also outfitted with launchers that allow it to fire the Kh-15P, says Air Force Technology. This is an air-to-surface missile that can travel up to 124 miles and comes loaded with a 550-pound warhead. Beyond that, the resource says, the Tu-160 is capable of carrying several types of aerial bombs that have a combined weight of 40 tons. All of this combines to make the Tu-160 a devastating attacking threat, which begs the obvious question: why is Russia moving these dangerous bombers, which Putin has used constantly to strike his enemy, as far away from Ukraine as possible? Two words: Operation Spiderweb. On June 1st, Ukraine launched a daring attack on Russian soil that involved the use of 100 short-range first-person view or FPV drones. Those drones didn't fly from Ukraine into Russia. Instead, Ukraine pulled off a staggeringly complex covert operation that involved sneaking the drones into Russia and even getting unwitting Russian truck drivers to transport them to the locations that Ukraine wanted to hit. The operation was a massive success. Ukraine reinvented the concept of the Trojan horse with this one attack, and the damage done to Russia was staggering. The Kyiv Independent reports that Operation Spiderweb is believed to have damaged 41 Russian aircraft, most of them being Tu-95 and Tu-22M3 bombers. These are Russia's primary platforms for launching missile strikes against Ukraine. By the end of the attack, Ukraine had destroyed around $7 billion of Russian equipment, disabling about a third of Russia's cruise missile bomber fleet in the process. French Admiral Pierre Vandier, who is currently NATO's Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, lauded the devastating strike. France 24 reports that he said the following in an interview: "What the Ukrainians did in Russia was a Trojan horse, and the Trojan horse was thousands of years ago. Today, we see this kind of tactic being reinvented by technical and industrial creativity." Now, find out more about exactly what Ukraine did during Operation Spiderweb in our video covering every step of the strike. Back to Vandier's comment, he concluded with a simple statement: it was a real coup. He's not wrong. With Operation Spiderweb, Ukraine pulled off something that Putin thought was impossible. It managed to sneak SBU operatives into Russia. Those operatives spent months setting up haulage companies and preparing for the devastating strike. And by the time Ukraine was ready to attack, those SBU agents were out of Russia, and Ukraine was using Russian drivers to get its drones into position. Putin's response comes down to the fact that he never wants to see a second Operation Spiderweb happen on Russian soil. He's been forced to weigh up his options. Either he keeps his remaining Tu-160s, along with his other bombers, close enough to Ukraine that it could launch a similar strike in the future. That would at least allow him to use the bombers to continue his devastating cruise missile strikes. Or he moves those bombers to such remote locations that Ukraine can't target them, though he sacrifices their attacking power in the process. Putin chose the latter option. He just made Russia weaker because he's terrified of what Ukraine will do next. And that logic starts to make sense when the second reason that Putin is moving his Tu-160s to Siberia comes into focus. The aircraft is valuable in more ways than one. On the monetary front, the Telegraph reports that each Tu-160 bomber cost Russia an enormous $500 million to build. That makes it the most expensive aircraft in Russia's inventory, even though the bomber is now almost 40 years old. For context, the Telegraph says the closest US equivalent to the Tu-160 is the B-52 Stratofortress, which is itself an older bomber. That aircraft cost around $94 million per unit, meaning Russia is spending 5 times as much as the US to maintain a comparable bomber fleet. Putin simply can't afford to lose more Tu-160s. He especially can't afford it because Russia is only believed to have 16 to 18 operational Tu-160 airframes of the 41 Tu-160s it's built. Some of those airframes are already damaged during Operation Spiderweb, meaning Putin may now be operating with closer to a dozen of his Tu-160s. That's unacceptable to Putin. Every lost Tu-160 cost his country $500 million, and Russia doesn't have the money to build more. It's been trying. The Telegraph says that Russia does still build Tu-160s, unlike the Tu-95s and Tu-22s that were also destroyed in Ukraine's stunning strike. However, manufacturing work is slow. The Russian Defense Ministry ordered 10 new Tu-160s back in 2018, though it's only managed to complete 2 of them since Putin launched his Ukraine invasion in February 2022. Sanctions have likely played a role in that slowdown, as Russia can't get its hands on the components it needs to build more Tu-160s. However, the money issue is also a major problem. In short, the Tu-160s that Putin has just lost can't be replaced, certainly not easily, and he's moving what he's left to Siberia because he needs to protect these bombers that were supposed to be a scourge to Ukraine. There's also another reason why Putin can't afford to lose more Tu-160s: their nuclear capabilities. Russia is one of the few nuclear-capable nations that has a complete triad of delivery vectors for its warheads. The Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation points this out in a fact sheet where it covers every aspect of Russia's nuclear inventory. It says that Russia is believed to have 5,977 nuclear warheads, of which 1,588 are actively deployed. Among the triad designated to deliver those nukes is a fleet of 12 nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, which combine to be capable of delivering 624 warheads. Beyond that, the majority of Russia's nuclear power stems from the land part of its triad, with Russia having deployed 306 strategic intercontinental ballistic missiles that combine to be capable of carrying 1,185 nuclear warheads. Then there's the aerial part of the triad. The center says that Russia has 68 heavy bombers in its fleet, with the Tu-160 and Tu-95MS making up the majority of its aerial nuclear threat. These bombers combine to be capable of launching roughly 700 nuclear warheads, which is where the problem now lies for Putin. Ukraine didn't take out all of the aerial arm of Russia's nuclear triad, but it took out a big enough chunk to make Putin worried. Remember that this is a leader who has used nuclear threats constantly during the Ukraine war. As the UK's Parliament's House of Commons library points out, Russia placed many of its nuclear weapons on heightened alert once Putin invaded Ukraine. In March 2023, it said that it was going to deploy tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus, which is a Russian ally that borders Ukraine. And in November 2024, Putin updated Russia's nuclear doctrine with conditions that lower the threshold for a Russian decision to use nuclear weapons. The point here is that Putin uses nukes to project power. Operation Spiderweb made a huge dent in that power projection, and Putin can't afford to let Ukraine follow up with more attacks that decimate his nuclear-capable bombers. So, Russia's Tu-160s have been sent to Siberia, along with several other far-flung air bases, because Putin knows he needs to protect the aircraft so he can maintain Russia's nuclear threat. And that leads to another reason Putin has made this move. He's trying to reduce risk. That's according to the Telegraph, which says that the move of the Tu-160s to the Anadyr airbase is designed to ensure that Ukraine can't carry out more drone strikes like Operation Spiderweb. Think about the message that operation sent to Putin here, and how it's affecting his mindset. According to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, Operation Spiderweb was 18 months in the making. That's over a year during which Ukraine's operatives were able to work right under Putin's nose to pull off their Trojan horse attack. Putin has to be thinking something that terrifies him. If Ukraine could do this once, what's to say it couldn't do it again? Are there more Ukrainian operatives working in Russia right now? Are those operatives targeting other air bases? These questions are impossible for Putin to answer, so his solution is to get his Tu-160s as far away from Ukraine as possible. At least with more distance, he makes it harder for Ukraine to pull off another Operation Spiderweb, because he adds new layers of operational complexity to any future drone attacks. Therein lies the reduction of risk. Of course, as mentioned earlier, moving Russia's Tu-160s and other bombers so far away from Ukraine means they can't be used to launch their cruise missiles at Ukraine cities. And that's a massive win for Zelensky. Of course, Russia is trying to play all of this off by suggesting that Ukraine didn't do as much damage as people thought, and that Russia doesn't perceive Ukraine as a serious threat. At least that's the impression given by Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov. On June 11, the Kyiv Independent reported on comments made by Ryabkov in the wake of Operation Spiderweb. The Deputy Foreign Minister claimed that the damage caused by Ukraine's drone attacks had been greatly exaggerated, adding that our nuclear deterrence potential against the US and any other potential adversary has not suffered significant damage. Ryabkov is surely lying. If Russia was so unafraid of the damage Ukraine had caused, there would be hordes of bombers getting sent as far away as possible. And that leads to the impact Putin's latest decision is going to have on the Ukraine war. One of those impacts has already been mentioned. The Tu-160 is going to be much less of a threat to Ukraine from here on out. The same goes for Russia's other bombers. Though Russia primarily uses Tu-95s and Tu-22s in its cruise missile campaigns, as reported by The Telegraph, it's not unheard of for Putin to use his far more valuable Tu-160s to hit Ukraine. As recently as June 6, Euromaidan press reported that Russia carried out a missile strike using Tu-160s instead of its other bombers. That in itself is revealing of Russia's current bomber position. Militani points out that the use of the Tu-160s for such attacks is unusual. It notes that Russia prefers to use its Tu-95s because their engines and airframes have longer lifespans than the larger and more complex Tu-160s. To summarize, Militani says, although the Tu-160 is faster and more powerful than the Tu-95, it's technically more complex and burns out faster in operation. Russia's June 6 use of a Tu-160 for a missile strike reveals Putin's desperation. He's running out of the other bombers Russia typically uses to fire missiles at Ukraine. So Russia resorted to using a Tu-160 for a strike. Putin didn't want to do that, and by moving most of Russia's Tu-160 fleet further back from the front lines, he's ensuring that Russia won't again place one of its most valuable aerial platforms at such risk. The result? Russia exerts less pressure on Ukraine. Missile strikes have been one of Putin's most important weapons during the Ukraine invasion. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Russia fires 24.3 missiles and drones at Ukraine per day, on average, as of February 2025. In December 2024, Reuters reported that Kyiv believed that Russia had launched 7,400 missiles at Ukraine between February 2022 and the last month of 2024. All of these missiles amount to pressure. They allow Putin to present a massive aerial threat to Ukraine, forcing it to burn through air defense ammunition while placing Ukraine's citizens in a constant state of terror. Putin's decision to move Tu-160s and other bombers as far away from Ukraine as possible relieves some of that pressure. Though Russia's missile strikes won't stop, but they'll get less intense, allowing Ukraine to preserve more of its air defenses, and without the constant looming threat of missiles to worry about, potentially plan counter-offensives against Russian positions inside Ukraine. The Asia Times says that Operation Spiderweb redefined the war between Ukraine and Russia. In addition to moving its bombers, Russia now has to try to build defenses in the air bases Ukraine hit to ensure they're protected if Ukraine strikes again. Surviving bombers will need to be relocated, the outlet said on June 7 before news broke that Putin is doing just that. Protecting bases from repeat attacks will mean erecting earthen revetments, installing radar-guided 30mm cannons and electronic warfare jammers to cover possible attack vectors. That all costs money and time that Putin doesn't have, and as a secondary issue, sending bombers further away from Ukraine means that Russia also has to divert trained soldiers and technicians who might otherwise rotate to the front line in support of the coming summer offensive, the Asia Times says. Add all of this to the fact that Operation Spiderweb punched a massive hole in Russia's nuclear weapons threat, with the withdrawal of bombers to far-flung locations, minimizing that threat even further, and a simple conclusion becomes clear. Russia is weaker than it's been at any point during the Ukraine war. And the great irony of Putin moving Tu-160s to Siberia is that he's the man who's making Russia weaker. He has to. Operation Spiderweb gave him no other choice, showcasing that the after effects of Ukraine's stunning drone strike show that it's changed the Ukraine war forever. And it's not just Russia as a military force that Ukraine weakened with Operation Spiderweb. Ukraine hit Russia where it hurts and left Putin humiliated as his position as Russia's strongman leader lies in ruins. Check out our video where we explore the deep cracks Ukraine's drone strike exposed in the Russian hierarchy. And remember to subscribe to the Military Show if you want more videos covering the latest development in the Ukraine war.